Nibiru, Planet X. Many names this thing has, but I do remember in 1983 reading in a high school. We had the science teacher had passed out a magazine, just a simple paperback thing, and we'd get one every week. And this week I got one that day in seventh grade, and it said that a Russian satellite had somehow went out of orbit or something, and it discovered what they called Planet X. And I remember reading an article about that, and it said Planet X was discovered. So now it's all denied, and they say, well, we call any planet we don't have a name for yet Planet X. So what do you say to that, and what have you learned about this?
Okay, well, what happened? Well, first off, I had heard intermittently information about that myself in terms of the possibility of that. Back several times, 1992, 1994, around that period of time, when I was actually, again, doing a variety of investigations, and, several of them at the high government level, and I kind of put it on the back shelf. I had so many things I was doing at that time, and, these were all really heavy-duty drug smuggling, murder, assassinations, all these types of inquiries, and I was getting two things. I was getting information about Planet X, and called Nibiru, or the dragon, the tail of the dragon, the red dragon, the visiting planet. They all had this whole variety of names on this thing, and of course it had been rumored, so to speak, like, oh, it was out there, and some people believed it, some people didn't, et cetera, et cetera. And it was this extraordinary story about this planet that goes way out in outer space and then comes back. And I had never chased it. I never pursued it, and there was a reason for it. I was doing very highly, very, very high-level inquiries for very important, sophisticated investigations, and the last thing I needed was to get involved with something that was goofy. I didn't need to go and, chasing some outrageous kind of a thing. What is this, Planet X? What is that supposed to mean? And all of that. I just wouldn't touch that with a 20-foot pole, because I was doing all of these, I would say, rather sophisticated, serious inquiries, and I didn't want to link my name to something like that. Something that couldn't be proven. There was just sort of this almost like a story kind of a thing out there, a legend, if you will. So I just stayed away from it. However, come about, and it's interesting that you talked about that 1983 date, because that's important. But come about 4 years ago, I had realized that the gold in Fort Knox is gone. There is no gold. That's gone, period. End of story. If anybody thinks that there may be some in there, but if you believe that the gold that's supposed to be there is in Fort Knox, you're really naive and uninformed. The gold has been removed from Fort Knox. And of course you have people like Senator Ron Paul, and then of course his son behind him, Rand Paul. Those guys have all came forward a couple of years ago and asked for an audit of the gold. Where is the gold? How much is there? Is it still there? And the bottom line was they laughed at them. The Federal Reserve is set up in a manner such that nobody can just go in and do an audit on the gold. So they just laughed at them. Now, to come along behind that, we had several countries have placed tons of gold bullion in deposit in our Fort Knox depository. Tons of it. That's Germany, Italy, France. All of these different nations all have huge varieties of amounts of gold. Germany is somewhere between between 1,000 and 1,500 tons of gold on deposit. In 2010, 2008, sometime around in there, a couple years back, they came forward, back when we had the financial crunch that hit everybody on the globe. They came forward, and the Germans wanted about several tons of their gold. They were told they could not get it until 2020. They were told they could not get an audit, even an audit, until 2020.
See, now why can't they just say, "Oh hell no, you're going to open it, you're going to give us our, what belongs to
Well,
us"?
they would have to invade the United States, wouldn't they? How would they do that? The bottom line is that the Federal Reserve, who is in charge of oversight on the gold, they just said, "I'm sorry, that's the best we can do for you. You can't go in, and no, you can't have any, and we're not even going to do an audit. It's too complex at this point in time. Get back to us in 2020." Okay, so now that was like, I couldn't believe that. I'm like you, I'm saying, what in the world? How can they do that? Okay, well, they can do it because they're the ones that have the key to the vault. End of story, right? They get the combinations. All right, so end of the story in terms of the gold. The gold is gone. We have to understand it. If you think anything different than that, you're I hate to use the term, you're a sucker or you're a fool. All right, so the gold is gone, and I thought, well, that's pretty amazing, because if you stole the gold, which is what has taken place, what would you do with that? What would you do with it? So then, lo and behold, the day before, and by the way, everything I'm telling you now, anybody that doesn't know about any of this, just go up on your computer and you can find it. A fellow named Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld, in charge of the Defense Department, came forward the day before the 9/11 attack in New York and at the Pentagon. The day before that event, he came forward on the floor of the United States Congress, doing one of those wonderful inquiries I was talking about. He told the Congress that the Defense Department had lost $2.3 trillion in their budget. They don't know where it went. They just they had gone. He came home and $2.3 trillion was gone. He said it was over a period of a couple of years. Actually said about 10 years. And $2.3 trillion is unaccounted for. It vanished. Now, since that announcement was done the day before Twin Towers, we never heard about it again. End of story. 2.3 trillion just evaporated before our eyes. Okay. Then they had that phony Twin Towers accident, terrorist accident that took place. Totally a false flag. I'm not even going to get into that, but forget that. That was carried out by bad guys and the American government carried that one out. So now, short time later, after the Rumsfeld thing, actually a year or so after that, they're doing an inquiry again on the floor of the Congress and the Senate with a lady who's in charge of the international banking for the Federal Reserve. And she said, one of the congressmen said that he had understood that they had lost about $9 trillion, that they did not know where it had gone off of the books of the Federal Reserve System, the banking system for international banking assistance, and that they were unable to find $9 trillion. Okay, so we have all the gold gone. We have 2.3 trillion that the Defense Department admits vanished. We have 9 trillion that lady who was sitting before the Congress, her answer to that was, which is the regular answer, and she says, "I do not know. We'll have to look into it. I will get back to you on that one." So she's going to get back to us on 9 trillion, and as far as I know, it's been 3 or 4 years, and she hasn't gotten back to anybody yet. All right. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, because you have to realize from doing things that I've done in the past, I'm used to seeing multi-millions in criminal activity all over Washington. They get away with it all the time. They steal it. They misappropriate funds. They do diversion. They alter the books, and they do everything you could possibly dream of and get away with it. So, but I sat back and I thought, wait a minute now. Even if you just talked about Rumsfeld's 2.3 trillion, or you talked about the gold, or you talk about 9 trillion out of the banking reserve system that disappeared, you can't launder that kind of money. The mafia would not be able to even come close to laundering that kind of money. So where did it go? Where does that kind of money vanish? Well, so I start putting old things together, a variety of information that had crossed my desk for several different years. And I remembered that in 95, I guess it was, I had snuck down with a cohort of mine underground at a place called the Denver Airport. And I had seen firsthand and filmed and photographed firsthand some of the craziness going on with the underground facilities at the Denver Airport. It had just broken open. It just made officially turned open in '95. By the way, as we speak today, they are still building underground at that airport. So I had those pictures, and I put those together, and I dragged out also some old information. I had so many guys that had come to me for over 10 years, actually, at different periods of time, and a guy would write me and drop me a letter, or he'd send a letter with a VHS videotape he had, or a little cassette, where he says, I'm a trucker, a truck driver, and I'm delivering goods underground to secret underground facilities all over the United States, some of them with 800 miles of roads underground. I drive an 18-wheeler truck, and I pass other 18-wheelers in intersections under the ground in these facilities.
Wow.
So at that point in time, again, now we're talking about, say, 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, I said, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so we got trillions of dollars literally disappeared, just vanishing. We have underground facilities that are mind-boggling. Some of them are 20 stories down underground. Some of them have mag-levitated trains running underground. Some of them have interconnections between going from Tennessee to Texas, where you can go underground the entire distance. And so all of a sudden it dawned on me, that's where the money's gone. But why would they do that? So I checked into it. I found out we have like 103 underground facilities in a variety of sizes. So then I put together, what was that business about Planet X, 1983? What was that first little exposure? So I started looking into that. I found out that in 1983, apparently, was the year that President Ronald Reagan was briefed on the bottom line being that it appears that the Planet X, Nibiru, the unknown planet with the 5 moons, was in fact real, it did exist, and was probably on its way back in to come around the sun one more time. And it's on a 3,600-year orbit. So what took place, not only was it a Russian, let's say an accidental exposure of that 1983 that you were talking about, but at the same time, we had sent out a brand new, somewhere around that period of time, 80, whatever it was, but it was 83, one of our brand new satellites was sent out with a giant infrared telescope. The first one they had use of, they sent it out, and it had returned pictures in 1983 of the Planet X, or Nibiru, way out in outer space, headed back in. So what had taken place was around 83, they started what they call continuity of government. And as a matter of fact, coincidentally, that was brought up on the floor of the Iran-Contra investigations the same week that my business was talked about on the floor of the Congress. And at that very same period of time was when this continuity of government was discussed, when they came and they asked a fellow named Ollie North, the colonel that was involved with all of that Iran-Contra smuggling and all, and they asked him what was a thing called Ready Emergency Exercise, Rex 84, 1984, Rex 84, what was that about? Because it was understood that it was the suspension of the Constitution and the creation of a variety of secret underground facilities. And what was it? This was something that the United States Congress didn't know anything about. Okay? So I'm putting it all together. Then I started looking more into, so that I would educate myself on this Planet X, what it was about. I found that we had one fellow that had discovered and had deciphered, he didn't go over all of them, but there was 20,000 clay tablets that had been discovered several years back, and they described the Planet X and the Anunnaki and all of that business, which of course This fellow's name was Dr. Sitchin, and he had actually gone over thousands of these tablets and deciphered them, and had come out with the shocking stories that had been written so many years back in Sumeria, that in fact the planet X did exist. It had come around, and in fact that was what had generated the floods that we know about as Noah's floods 3,600 years ago, and that it is in a returning orbit of 3,600 years. So Sitchin, of course, he came out with several books, wrote about it. Half of his people believed him. Half of his people thought he was a fruitcake and nutcase because nobody knew about it. No astronomers couldn't verify it, et cetera, et cetera. But when I looked into it, I found out that what he was talking about is verified in the Bible. It's verified that Tibetan monks up in the top of the mountainside. It's verified by Chinese astronomers thousands of years ago, written in their own text, and a whole multitude of foreign cultures that completely verify this same thing. And that is that there is a large planet. It's 5 times the size of Earth. It has 5 moons that travels with it. It's like its own little small solar system. It does not give off any heat, or it does not give any light off, so that's why it has not seen unless you utilize these high-powered infrared telescopes. So I continued my investigating. I found out that, first off, I got videotapes and stills and all inside these underground facilities. I was able to secure that. I found out that they not only building 103 of those, finishing them actually at this time, but they were supplying them for the last 10, 15 years with survival foods, with billions of dollars worth of survival foods. They're buying military weapons and equipment, billions of dollars of it, to be utilized as riot control for when the general public actually finds out about this thing, which obviously will never be announced. It cannot be announced. There's no way you could ever do it. Even if you were a good guy, a good president, an honest president, you couldn't do it because the entire world would go nuts on the premise of the idea that this thing may come back, because the reactions, what will take place to Earth when it passes close by, will be phenomenal. I continued my inquiry. I found out a guy named Robert Harrington, who was the head of the Washington, D.C. Naval Observatory, finally found it also, notified Dr. Sitchin, sat down with him and said, I found it. It took me, I've been looking for this thing for 15 years. I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. And this thing will be coming back. And exactly when is hard to tell. But he verified it, being the director. He was in the process of writing a complete report on this, and he died of a strange cancer, a very fast-acting cancer.
Now, let me ask this really quick. Because I've heard a lot about Harrington, and now I have to ask because people are going to want me to. How do we know for sure that that's what he was working on and that's what he found?
Because it's on a videotape. I have that. As a matter of fact, you can find it. Persons can find it on the YouTube, I believe. If you'll look up Robert Harrington, let's see, just if you put Robert Harrington, Discovery of Planet X, or Nibiru, you will find that he has a meeting when he met with Dr. Sitchin, a sit-down meeting in his office at the observatory in Washington, D.C. I believe it was in 1963. It was videotaped, so the entire meeting is videotaped. End of story. Okay, so now I continued my investigating. I was looking as far into this as I could. I then found out, let's see, not only is it actually on record in the Chinese, ancient Chinese records, and all of these other ancient antiquity records of all sorts of back during the times of just a few years BC even, that there are reports on this thing. We have to remember, like in the case of the Chinese astronomers back in those days that worked under the emperor, if they even did a mistake, he cut their heads off. You know, I mean, that literally was the way they ran that in the ancient Chinese astronomy. If a guy did something wrong, they just cut his head off and threw him in the garbage. So these guys weren't making this stuff up. The Sumerians, they weren't writing on clay tablets and saying, let's write this crazy thing down. This is going to really freak people out. You know, these guys weren't hoaxsters, for crying out loud. They were writing serious events that took place. And took place, in their face. So I started realizing, okay, the United States has really gotten scared. This is serious stuff. 103 underground facilities that I know of. The Russians came out in 2010. Now again, see, these dates are important. 2010, the Russians came out and they said, we're going to build 5,000 survival tunnels, underground tunnel. There's going to be 5,000 of them. They said we're going to have them done by 2000, at the beginning of 2013. And they did it. They have most of them finished. In China, when I looked up their thing, find out what they were doing, if anything. See, because these are coordinated efforts with the highest levels of all the major nations of the world. They're all scared to death of something. They're not going to save the general public. It's an impossibility. But they're going to do continuity of government for the wealthiest elite and the governmental heads of these different nations. They're the ones that are going to be down underground. The rest of us are going to be trying to exist and live above ground, which is going to be very hard when you find out all of the potential effects of this planet coming back close to Earth.
See, now I'm curious. I'm curious, really quick though. Now, if they are aware that this is going to happen, then why aren't they doing something about these nuclear power plants? Because that would be my biggest fear: is having to survive any amount of time with all these nuclear power plants going down. Well,
that certainly is an important part of the problem. But the bottom line is. Now you asked that question. Now let me turn that around. Let me ask you. You're the President of the United States. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about 130 nuclear power plants that we have in the United States? You're going to tell everybody, oh, listen, temporarily we're going to shut all of this stuff down because there's something that we're not going to tell you about coming, but I'm going to shut it down. Okay, so the bottom line is they can't do anything about it. They can't do anything about it, all right? So whatever happens when those things are disconnected and discombobulated and they start overheating, you got to hope, you got to hope and pray that no more than half of them become like the Chernobyl, right?
Right.
Everybody knows that was the Russian one, all right, the problem with that, okay? That may turn that into a dead zone for 100 years. Okay. So that is one point. I'm glad you brought that up, but that's all it is. It's only one point because I'm going to get into the rest of the problems that we have with this Nibiru when it comes back. Now, I looked into China. I said, okay, I know Russia's doing it. I know. And by the way, what we also did a couple of years ago, we created an underground, what they call a food vault, a seed vault. It actually is a vault that contains underground into the mountainside. It's up in, I think it's in Denmark. It is a container holding seeds of every growing plant on Earth so they can be replanted 50 or 100 years from now to try to start Earth back up again. And that's an international seed vault. Again, something you can simply look up and you can see it and find it on your computer.
I know that's true. I've seen it. I've seen the pictures. I've seen all the information.
That's right. That's right. Okay. End of story. Why were they doing that? Okay. So China, when I looked into their situation, I found out a few years ago they did an extensive report on relative to Earth movements. If the surface and the crust of the Earth moved due to a celestial external effect of gravitational forces, what would take place in the high and the low zones around China. They did this major report. After that report, they started diligently rejuvenating underground facilities for themselves. They have so many. There are thousands of underground facilities in China. Now, they had a head start because they had a couple thousand of them going back to the days of antiquity in China, where entire wars and towns and villages, wars were fought from inside the tunnels, and towns and villages were actually maintained inside thousands of tunnels in the earth in China. They're rejuvenating all of those, as many as they can, and they're doing it also in conjunction with something that's called ghost cities. Have you heard anything about ghost cities?
I absolutely have.
Okay. And by the way, I have films and documentation on all this stuff I'm talking about. Ghost cities, at this time, there's about 15 of them. These are entire cities, the equivalent of New York City or Paris, France, built in the last 10 years. They are completely empty. They are finished, done, totally. In other words, it's like if you built New York City, replicated it in Denver, or in the middle of the desert, Sahara Desert, or in one of our own deserts right here. If you went out in the desert and built and created New York City and Paris, France, completely, and then kept them empty. That's what they're doing. Each one of these cities can hold 10, 15 million people. They are empty, and they're being kept empty, and they are also still working on them today as we speak. All right, I have, again, pictures and videos and all on that, too. Those are all included in my DVD. Now, they have tunnels that inside the tunnels, they actually have 3,000 nuclear weapons hidden away. Have no idea where that fits in, to be honest. They have ships and planes and warplanes inside the ground, inside these tunnels, hidden away. All right? That's China's operations. So I continued looking. Now I'm convinced. I said, okay, this thing's out there, and I wanted to know more about it. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. This planet, this giant planet coming in, obviously would cause, when it got close, it would have unbelievable effects. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm still here. I thought they were about to cut you off, buddy.
Oh, okay. No, well, that's always possible. I don't know what that is, but that may be on my end. Okay, so I'm still looking. I'm trying to expand my handle on this thing, understand this thing, and I started looking and checking with astronomers, and you have to realize something. Everybody has to get a handle on this too. NASA is a lying bunch of bums. All right, NASA does what they are told to do. You know, for some reason, we got this psychological concept that the government might lie to us, and this senator might, and Congress might, and these guys will do all this backstabbing and do all this stuff on us, and they'll never tell us the truth. And we understand that. We almost accept that now. That's a shame. But we have this psychological background idea that NASA now, see, those NASA, they're just a bunch of dumb scientists, and they'll tell us, boy, if they see something out there or they know something's going on, they're going to tell us. No, they're not. They're not going to tell you. They've been specifically told not to tell anybody about this. And it's on the basis, again, we got to get back to logic. You cannot tell the public that something like this is going to happen. And particularly, you can't say, hey, I'm going to give you an approximate date. Can't do that. It would be, we never even seen a riot like you would have across the entire globe when this thing finally.
Now that makes total sense. I mean, I've thought about that. If I was president, how do you just come out and tell 7 billion people you're going to die? But
that's not going to happen.
At the same time,
as a matter of fact, it's just never going to happen. All right. So, and I'll explain to you what's going to happen, but that's not going to happen. So I started looking, and I snooped, and again, I've developed some very, very high-level points. People, a good friend of mine for many years used to write the speeches for Ronald Reagan and Bill Casey for the head of the CIA during Reagan's time. She was with Bill Casey for years and years. So anyhow, that's just one person that I could rely on for some of these questions. But when it comes to looking into the planets, I discovered that all of the planets, starting out with Pluto and coming back in, they're heating up. They're changing in their chemistry, and they're wiggling in their orbits. There's funny activity going on. Some of them actually are even having complete movement on the face of the planets, etc. So the planets are now being affected. Now we go number 2. What else is happening? The sun is going crazy with a lot of extraordinary activity. It's being affected by Nibiru already at this point in time. Volcanoes and earthquakes are increasing and are being cultivated already by Nibiru coming back in. As of yesterday, and I think this will probably surprise you, maybe it won't. As of yesterday, there was 34 to 37 volcanoes erupting on the Earth. Not just grumbling and mumbling. 35 as of yesterday were erupting on the face of the globe. There are 27 to 35 other volcanoes that are on the watch list that they may start erupting. All right? That's today. Yellowstone Park, a month or 2 back, generated so much extraordinary heat that the roadway leading into some of the central parts of the park had to be blocked off because the roads turned into pea soup and they melted.
Yeah,
right?
It's my understanding that Russia is, someone made a good point in the chat room, so I thought I'd bring it up, that Russia is actually, it's been said they have enough underground facilities for, I guess, all their people.
They're claiming, well, whatever. now I have to explain something with the Russian deal. They're set up for moderate, medium-sized amounts of people, but they have a lot of them, and they're almost like bomb shelters. So now they have bigger ones that are going to be for the wealthy elite, upper crust of Russia, and those are like the big fancy ones we have that can hold several thousand and keep them for a long period of time. And by the way, we even have some underground facilities that are totally just set up for growing food underground, underground synthetic growth situations. And they are also, as I mentioned earlier, interconnected with the train cars and highways and all the rest of that. It's mind-boggling. It's way past what everybody would ever believe. You wouldn't want to believe it, but when you see it, you see it. End of story. Now, what else do we have? So we have volcanoes, we have earthquakes, all of that stuff happening. We have the planets heating up. We have, how about in 2010 and 11, 12, 13, up around in there, how about all the dead animals and fish and birds? We had, like a million birds fall dead out of the sky.
Not just once either.
Excuse me?
I say not just one time either.
No, that's right. So we're talking all kinds of animals, fish, multi-millions and millions of them dead and all that. Okay. So they also changed all of the space operations. They were all changed instantly, things they were planning to do, and then all of a sudden we're not going to do it anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Because they got so scared, so frightened about the reality of within a few years of this planet coming back and the havoc it will wreak on the Earth when it comes by, is unbelievable. Now, it scared the big shots. Okay, they just shut down. They're not even stealing for themselves anymore now. I mean, they're stealing considerably less because their whole frame of mind has been changed. The ones that know about it, but don't fool yourself. And for you congressmen and senators out there, don't fool yourself. If you're not up to speed on this thing, you may not be on the list. In your tail, it's going to be up here with the rest of us trying to figure out what we're going to do. Now, what will happen? What will happen when this thing comes by? One thing is, it's so large, and it's apparently a solid mass, and this is the best it's been analyzed. And again, you have to remember, and this is important, this is what caused Noah's flood when it came by. There are biblical reports of one group of soldiers, where 187,000 of them were killed in one afternoon from the flaming flaming rain that came down from the heavens. All right? Now, what will happen? This will come in, if it happens, it will come in and it will pass and cause a solar eclipse. It's very large, again, 5 times the size of Earth. It will black out the sun for about 3 hours. It will not be, we're not talking when it goes between us and the sun. It's not talking about a 15-minute eclipse. We're talking about 3 hours the first time around. Probably the same thing the second time when it goes back out. It will come in, go around the sun, just like a meteor or a comet does. Now, I want everybody to remember now, we have Halley's Comet. It comes around every 75 years. We know that. We know how long it is. We know how big it is. We know what it's going to do. It's kind of out there, and it's just a snowball, if you will, typical comet structure of dirt and frozen ice and frozen residue and what have you. But something to be concerned with is, when it flies by, we look at that way up there out, it's in up in the sky with the rest of the stars. When it goes by, it has a 24 million mile tail of junk coming behind it. And we see it, and it looks neat, because you see this glowing thing in the front and this big, long, glowing, luminous line being dragged along behind it, and that's that tail that I'm talking about. But unless you get in and look it up, I never realized it's 24 million miles long. Holy mackerel, that's a lot of junk. And it comes around 75 years, goes around behind the sun, comes back out, shoots back out to outer space for another 75 years. Now, a lot of people, when you talk about Nibiru, and it's a 3,600 year orbit. It's not 75, it's 3,000 years. And you could, typically myself, before I knew too much about this, I instantly thought, well, that's ridiculous. Holy mackerel. Something goes out that far for 3,000 years, that can't be real. All right. But a few years back, there was a thing called Hale-Bopp comet that was discovered, I think, around in the 70s, and came by a few years later. And when it did the same thing, came up, went around, swung around behind the sun, went back out. And when they did the math on that, they said, oh, now this was newly discovered. It will not be back for 4,200 years. That's the Hale-Bopp comet. You can look these up. Remember that. Hale-Bopp comet, 4,200 year orbit. So the idea that 3,600 year orbit for Nibiru being ridiculous, it's not, obviously.
Now,
all right?
Does Nibiru, does this have a brown dwarf star with it, or moons, or what's coming with it outside of just
it has? It physically has, according. Now, by the way, I'm going to tell you there has been one good picture that I know of. Well, actually, there's two, but there's one good one that I'm positive of being right, because it was a NASA screw up, and they took the picture. And they took the picture with their new fancy equipment, and it accidentally got out. And, of course, nowadays, when these things get out, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube with the computer programs now on the website. So once it was out, it's out there. And it is a telescopic picture taken by NASA, accidentally released to the public, grabbed up and replicated, and it's a real photo. The singular planet is Nibiru. It has 5 moons circling it, traveling with it, and when we do the comparison with the Hale-Bopp and also with Halley's Comet of 24 million miles, I have no idea of what kind of length and depth of junk is going to be trailing behind a planet that's dragging stuff for 3,000 years and gathering more as it comes. And unfortunately, what we're looking at in terms of if this travels as has been mathematically laid out and does come by, what it will do, it will come around the sun. We are we have a little tiny orbit that where we go around the sun. All right, and when we go around the sun, we will pass through that tail one time, and then we will make the completion of that orbit around. It will be ahead of us, so to speak, and it will go back out to the far reaches of space, and we will pass through the tail at least a second time. Now, the mathematics of this is really rather complex, but it would be about 1 hour journey through the tail of this debris the first time, probably an hour through the second time going through that debris. This will be the most devastating meteor shower that you could ever imagine in science fiction. So that's going to be one of the big problems. The first problem probably will be the electromagnetic effects that will completely shut down all electricity on the globe. So, and this is from the equivalent, let's say, of solar flares, that type of a reaction. All right. So you would have all of the electricity of the globe shut down. You will have meteor showers that we will go through at least probably twice. Now, here's where I say at least twice, and the mathematics gets a little strange. The planets of our solar system are called, they're on the elliptic plane, they call it, and it is somewhat of a flat plane. All the orbits of all 9 planets, I'm still saying 9, whether they like it or not. Poor little Pluto, we don't want to cut him out.
Yeah.
So you got 9 planets on somewhat of a flat plane. They're all circling in different amounts of time relative to their orbits around the sun. But the Nibiru, if it comes in on our flat plane or reasonably close to it, we will go through a real, very heavily laid tail of debris and junk twice. If it comes, some people are arguing the fact that it will be at about 30 degrees south. In other words, tipped 30 degrees off of the ecliptic plane, having it come in sort of on an angle, like just a 30-degree angle coming in, passing through our plane and back out in its own plane. If that happens, that varies things like how long we pass through the tail of debris, how many times we do or don't pass through that debris, and all of those things. So that's the stuff that, when you come down to the bottom line, throws a little monkey wrench into trying to figure out the timing on this. Now, everybody's big question is when this might happen. All right? Now, the mathematics from several guys that have been studying this, that are astronomers and have been studying astronomy and science and all the rest of that, and the history. See, again, we have dates that we can go by to a certain extent. And I have to add, how much time do we have now, anyhow? Got another hour?
Yeah, we have another hour, and we've got a break coming up in about 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, all right, I'm going to do an introduction to another little part of this. We'll take a break, and then when we come back, I'll fill you in for the rest of the details on what it looks like on this thing. But there was something that was discovered in 1999, and it's called the sky disk. And this was a piece of an archaeological find that was created 3,600 years ago. It's been dated to the very day, and I will explain that when we come back from the break. But I'm going to explain to you what the sky disk does for us in terms of studying this thing. It's amazing, and it's very scary because it gives us apparently an exact date on the last time it passed around and when it might pass around again, along with the biblical writings of all of the Bibles for the most part of the earth and the Chinese astronomical writings and all the rest of that. We get very close to an actual date on the return of this thing.
Nibiru, Planet X. Many names this thing has, but I do remember in 1983 reading in a high school. We had the science teacher had passed out a magazine, just a simple paperback thing, and we'd get one every week. And this week I got one that day in seventh grade, and it said that a Russian satellite had somehow went out of orbit or something, and it discovered what they called Planet X. And I remember reading an article about that, and it said Planet X was discovered. So now it's all denied, and they say, well, we call any planet we don't have a name for yet Planet X. So what do you say to that, and what have you learned about this?
Okay, well, what happened about? Well, first off, I had heard intermittently information about that myself in terms of the possibility of that. Back several times, 1992, 1994, around that period of time, when I was actually, again, doing a variety of investigations, and, several of them at the high government level, and I kind of put it on I put it on the back shelf. I had so many things I was doing at that time, and, these were all really heavy-duty drug smuggling, murder, assassinations, all these types of inquiries, and I was getting two things. I was getting information about Planet X, and called Nibiru, or the dragon, the tail of the dragon, the red dragon, the visiting planet. They all had this whole variety of names on this thing, and of course it had been rumored, so to speak, like, oh, it was out there, and some people believed it, some people didn't, et cetera, et cetera. And it was this extraordinary story about this planet that goes way out in outer space and then comes back. And I had never chased it. I never pursued it, and there was a reason for it. I was doing very highly, very, very high-level inquiries for very important, sophisticated investigations. And the last thing I needed was to get involved with something that was goofy. I didn't need to go and, chasing some outrageous kind of a thing. What is this, Planet X? What is that supposed to mean? And all of that. I just wouldn't touch that with a 20-foot pole, because I was doing all of these, I would say, rather sophisticated, serious inquiries. And I didn't want to link my name to something like that. Something that couldn't be proven. There was just sort of this almost like a story kind of a thing out there, a legend, if you will. So I just stayed away from it. However, come about, and it's interesting that you talked about that 1983 date, because that's important. But come about 4 years ago, I had realized that the gold in Fort Knox is gone. There is no gold. That's gone, period. End of story. If anybody thinks that there may be some in there, but if you believe that the gold that's supposed to be there is in Fort Knox, you're really naive and uninformed. The gold has been removed from Fort Knox. And of course you have people like Senator Ron Paul, and then of course his son behind him, Rand Paul. Those guys have all came forward a couple of years ago and asked for an audit of the gold. Where is the gold? How much is there? Is it still there? And the bottom line was they laughed at them. The Federal Reserve is set up in a manner such that nobody can just go in and do an audit on the gold. So they just laughed at them. Now, to come along behind that, we had several countries have placed tons of gold bullion in deposit in our Fort Knox depository. Tons of it. That's Germany, Italy, France. All of these different nations all have huge varieties of amounts of gold. Germany is somewhere between between 1,000 and 1,500 tons of gold on deposit. In 2010, 2008, sometime around in there, a couple years back, they came forward, back when we had the financial crunch that hit everybody on the globe. They came forward, and the Germans wanted about several tons of their gold. They were told they could not get it until 2020. They were told they could not get an audit, even an audit, until 2020.
See, now why can't they just say, "Oh hell no, you're going to open it. You're going to give us our, what belongs to
Well,
us."
they would have to invade the United States, wouldn't they? I mean, how would they do that? The bottom line is that the Federal Reserve, who is in charge of oversight on the gold, they just said, "I'm sorry, that's the best we can do for you. You can't go in, and no, you can't have any, and we're not even going to do an audit. It's too complex at this point in time. Get back to us in 2020." Okay, so now that was like, I couldn't believe that. I'm like you, I'm saying, what in the world? How can they do that? Okay, well, they can do it because they're the ones that have the key to the vault. End of story, right? They get the combinations. All right, so end of the story in terms of the gold. The gold is gone. We have to understand it. If you think anything different than that, you're I hate to use the term, you're a sucker or you're a fool. All right, so the gold is gone, and I thought, well, that's pretty amazing, because if you stole the gold, which is what has taken place, what would you do with that? What would you do with it? So then, lo and behold, the day before, and by the way, everything I'm telling you now, anybody that doesn't know about any of this, just go up on your computer and you can find it. A fellow named Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld, in charge of the Defense Department, came forward the day before the 9/11